silence the big lie operatives, those who promote famine, Gortamor, and great hunger, all euphemisms, all cover-up of crime. And so when it didn't complete the job, it did cause them to give up many of their falsehoods. Christine Keneally abandoned many of her falsehoods after that. But she continues with the cover-up of the British Army. In other words, the last remaining lie that must be told is actually less a lie than a cover-up. To keep the old famine, Gortamor, great hunger lie going, you must conceal the role of the British Army. They committed that Holocaust. And so I sat down and I wrote the book, and I get it. It's the comprehensive work. It can be improved upon, but all of the basics are there. Anyone who reads that book will know that it was a genocide, and if they are intelligent and have integrity, they will excise, like I was forced to do. I had to excise the word famine from my vocabulary regarding that period in Ireland, because to continue using that word, famine or great hunger or Gortamor, they all dishonor the murdered millions, and we really should not do that. Genocide should not be encouraged by covering up past genocides. If we are ever going to get governments to stop perpetrating genocides, we, the people, must stop covering up those that have been perpetrated already. To cover up a genocide is to encourage more of them. Everyone knows that. That's my say for now. Any question?
No, I'll come on to Neil now. Neil, do you want to give us a little introduction there about yourself and what you're doing currently over there?
Over here in Nova Scotia, there's a good strong Gaelic community, mostly of Scottish Gaelic speakers, but of Irish Gaelic speakers as well. It was always known, even around here and at home in Ireland, as Am Er Mór, the time of the Great Slaughter or Massacre. That was the genesis of the Holocaust, and some people even called it, some old people would always have used the name and Holocaust, the time of the Holocaust. And they would have got that name, of course, not from the newspaper, because they got that name originally from people who'd been educated in the hedge schools. And contrary to what a lot of people would tell you, the Irish hedge schools, the education was pretty good in them. They would have taught you Latin, ancient Greek was taught, of course, the Irish was taught as well, and and a variety of other subjects. And what really inspired me was Chris's book. It really encouraged me to look at the Holocaust in a totally different light. I couldn't even use the words famine or Gortamor or even Gartha after that. So it was really inspiring book. I had a copy of it, but we had two copies of it at the time, but they're gone now. They're somewhere around. I was back in Ireland, or home in Ireland, when I read it, and showing the map and things they got there, and so it's just a pity that there's not an awful lot more of that book. It's a pity it's not published. There's several million copies of it. I don't know how many that you've done up, Chris, but it was a
well, actually, there are probably 1 million copies of the pamphlet, but the book only has had about 1,000 or so copies, but there will be soon a new edition in Ireland. In fact, the IRB are ready to do it in a few weeks, is my understanding. And I'm pleased that they're not ready now, because I'm adding a lot to it. For example, with the help of a man from Killarney who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and a man from Cork, from Mill Street, who lives in London, and myself, we were able to find the general of the army who was in charge of Holocaust. And it turns out that he was General Sir Edward Blakeney. His uncle, he was born in England, but his uncle was England's High Sheriff of County Galway. And that General Sir Edward Blakeney, his uncle was John Blakeney, but General Sir Edward Blakeney led the 67 regiments who starved about 5.2 million people to death. in Ireland, and possibly over 6 million. And those who say 6.2 million, I don't argue with it, because it could very well be 6.2 million. But I stick personally with the number 5.2 million. That I think I can defend by the figures, by the record. So this General Blakeney is, as I point out, is remembered in Ireland today, or he can be, if we were ever taught. He has been written out of history, as you both know very well. He certainly formed no part of the education that I had, either in the States or in Ireland. In fact, I went to school in Castlereagh, County Roscommon, during the late 1940s with a Danny Blakeney, precisely the same name as the Goebbels of Britain who perpetrated the Holocaust in Ireland. And he must be a relation, perhaps an illegitimate child or grandchild, or probably grandchild, great-grandchild. But aside from the hundreds of mass graves left behind by General Edward Blakeney, there's also the village of Blakeney outside Mount Bellew, County Galway. And I must say, the people living in that village must not know the origin of the name of their village, because they will certainly change the name. It is shocking. It is like having a village of Goebbels in Tel Aviv or in Warsaw. It's so bad it's comical that there would be a place in Ireland named Blakeney. That's my say for now.
Yeah, like, I mean, you would never get any place named after Cromwell or any of his clique like Ayrton or his predecessor Elizabeth. When they committed the two Holocausts or genocides before the Great One, which nearly finished us as a nation. It's just incredible. Like, they would even name anywhere, to have even anywhere named after that butcher. Like, you know what I mean? And not, I guess, so you can't call him anything.
By the way, on the internet at these times, I noticed that there's a general push to promote the notion of a 1925 famine in Ireland. And that is really weird, because, and I think the purpose of it is to normalize the one of 1845, 1850, 1851. Yeah. I think it's an attempt to normalize that one, because my mother was 17 years of age that year, living in Ireland. My father was 21 years of age, living in County Laois, in different parts of Ireland. They never told me a word about any hunger in 1925. Their older brothers and sisters had left for the States earlier. They departed maybe in 1926 and 27, and their aunts and uncles had come earlier in the 1860s and 70s. So the notion of a new famine, a new story of a famine in 1925 is shocking. It is utterly false. There's absolutely no point to it, no truth to it, and the only purpose of it is to conceal the one of 1845, 1850.
Yeah, I would know quite a bit about the 1920s in Ireland, and I can tell you there was nothing like that. I'm surprised. I'm shocked to even hear that. I've been trying to come up with something like that. There definitely was no starvation. There were people hungry, surely, but that was poverty. That was because of the Free State. But there was definitely nothing, no famine or anything like that at 1925. No, definitely not. I mean, I can tell you that right now. My own grandfather was heavily involved in the Republican struggle at the time, and as well as other members of nearly all members of my family. And I do know in 1925 now in Tyrconnell, like, for example, Padre O'Donnell, he started the land annuities campaign, which was a thing that was written into the treaty that nobody knew about. The Collins and Co agreed to where the Irish would actually pay the British Empire quite a lot of money in revenue, for land for basically Irish land that was taken off the landlords who were responsible for the Holocaust. So not only are we naming villages after the people who tried to exterminate us, but we were paying them as well. paying them very, very same people, those very, very same landlords, because that's where those monies and finances went.
That is correct. That continued right up until I think 1973, Neil.
It's just criminal. Like, I mean,
yes, my father was paying it through the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine? Could you imagine the state of Israel? Paying Germany for what they went through. You know what I mean? It just wouldn't happen. It really wouldn't. Could you imagine, like, the...
Well, I must say, while it was collected from the Irish farmers across the country, it was not sent to England after 1933. De Valera stopped forwarding it to England, and Britain retaliated with an embargo on all Irish cattle and goods. That created the difficulties of 1934 and 5, when cattle were no longer accepted into Britain, and the Irish government encouraged the people of Ireland to consume them themselves. But that was you might have heard I'm a living people back in the 40s and 50s describing the embargo very, very well and how they coped with it. But that was as a result of the withholding. That was a result of the withholding of the rents that were collected off all farmers in Ireland to be sent over to amortize what had been the above market prices that had been given to the old English landlords. But as I say, the Irish government stopped forwarding that money sometime around 1933, 32 or 33.
Yeah, it was definitely 32, Chris, yeah. And that there's where it kicked off the economic war, then from 32 to 38. Yes. Yeah, no, it was definitely 32, because, and De Valera only did that, by the way, because up in Tyrconnell, or some people call it Donegal, Padre O'Donnell from 1925 onwards had been leading a land annuities campaign, the refusal to pay for land that people were already living on, and he was mostly inspired, and those who started it in, Tyrconnell. They were inspired solely by the memories of their grandparents, and about the food removal. That was their main motivation for it. And De Valera did that he did it because it was either do that or face the possibility of the IRA starting another war for independence. Do you know what I mean? On their own, without his permission. So, I mean, he wanted to fight the English again, but he didn't want the IRA to do it for him. Like,
you mean De Valera wanted to fight the English?
No, he gave the impression that he did.
Well, that was always the game. That was always the game he played. But like De Valera, if you want to discuss De Valera in Irish history, Britain's greatest spy, in my opinion. Now that's my opinion. I'm not saying that is the opinion of this radio or anything like that. Britain's greatest spy. But we want to talk about the Holocaust here. I'd love to talk about that.
What happened in those years? Yeah, what happened in those years is that the British government sent in 67 regiments of its 130 regiment army. More than half its Empire Army at the time were sent into Ireland to remove Ireland's abundant foodstuffs, its livestock, and all its crops at gunpoint. That removal of food caused the deaths by starvation of some 5.2 million Irish innocents. That is what happened. Those 67 regiments were led by General Sir Edward Blakeney, again, there's a village by the name of Blakeney outside Mount Bellew in County Galway today. I can't imagine. But I must say, I think that nobody who's listening to this or will listen to it has ever known that there was a commander-in-chief of the food removal army in Ireland, much less that his name was Edward Blakeney. But that is a fact. That's in the record. We found it. It's there. It cannot be denied, and it must be taught in the schools. The Maris brother, who taught for generations in Castlereagh, County Roscommon, was asked a few years ago, brother, seeing that you now say that it was genocide, why did you teach us all famine in school? And Brother Enda said, I had no choice. I had to teach the curriculum as provided to me by the government. Now that raises another question, well, a few questions. Why did a Christian brother spend his career deceiving his students about a genocide, a genocide of his own people and of the students' own people? What kind of a system of education is that? And so he obeyed the instructions of the government. But who in the Irish government perpetrated that lie, and why did they do it? Ireland is unique on earth, so far as I know. I do not know, have never heard of another nation that concealed a genocide of its own people perpetrated by a foreign power. I've never heard of such a thing. I've never heard of such a cover-up before. And I must say, we should take a leaf out of the Israel's handbook in this matter. There's nobody on earth who does not know about what the Nazis did. Well, they might not know what the Nazis did to the Slavs and to the cripples and to the homosexuals and to Catholic priests, but the whole world knows what the Nazis did to the Jews, and they should know about it. And they say the world should also know the similar crime, almost identical crime, that was perpetrated by Britain in Ireland, where they turned the whole nation, the entire island, into a prison of the Irish people and starved them to death. Over half the Irish Catholic populations, were starved to death in those years. Well, starved to death or died of malnutrition-induced diseases. By the way, here's a little bit of a joke. You have to laugh at this little anecdote. Speranza's husband and the father of Oscar Wilde, William Wilde, earned a knighthood from the British government for his census work of 1841-1851. In his census work, he writes that 22,100 and some people died of starvation between 1841 and 1851. But he claimed that an awful lot of people developed eye sickness, diseases of the eye. He was an eye specialist. And so he claimed that a very great many people started suffering from eye diseases. But he completely covers up. He won his knighthood, certainly, because he was the first concealer of the Irish Holocaust.
Right, and was he anything to Jane Wilde, mother of Oscar?
Her husband, believe it or not, they were husband and wife.
And yet she wrote
this. And he was the greatest opponent of truth regarding those years, and his wife was the best exemplar of truth teller at the same time.
Because I'm going to read a poem that she wrote for the famine year, and if you don't mind, and I do
Holocaust
like
year. Holocaust year.
Holocaust. Well, mind you, you cannot change what Speranza called it. Jane L.G. called it. I would be happy to go with that.
Yeah, she called it the famine year. So the woman that wrote it. So I'll just read it here for you. Weary men, what ye reap, golden corn for the stranger. What ye sow, human corpses that await for the avenger. Fainting forms, all hunger stricken. What you see in the offing, stately ships to bear our food away amid the stranger's scoffing. There's a proud array of soldiers. What do they do? What they do around your door? They guard our master's granary from the thin hands of the poor. Pale mothers, wherefore weeping? Would to God that they were dead. Our children swoon before us. We cannot give them bread. We are wretches, famished, scorned, human tools to build your pride, but God will take vengeance for the souls for whom Christ died. Now is your hour of pleasure, bask ye in the world's caress, but our whitening bones against ye will arise as witness. From the cabins and the ditches, in shard uncoffined masses, for the angel of trumpet will know them as he passes. A ghastly, spectral army before God will stand, and arraign ye as our murderers, O spoilers of our land. And That was Jane Wilde wrote that, and it's a favourite poem of mine.
Yeah,
so
they're verses number 1 and 6.
Yes,
they're the key ones.
And that appears.
Nobody mentions. I'm sorry. There's a great Republican as well who highlighted the Holocaust as it was going on, and that was John Mitchell. And it's very, very sad to see that. I mean, and he was a great Republican writer. I mean, he was definitely up there with the likes of Pierce and Wolfe Tone and Thomas Davis and all. And it's very unfortunate that you don't hear him. I mean, he called it for what it was. He says, yeah, God may have sent the blight, but it was England who sent the famine. And he said it wasn't a famine. It was there was food enough to feed Ireland's population 3 times over at least. And he says the population was just exterminated as far as he was concerned. And it's very deliberate that the Irish academia, especially, how they focus on the fact that John Mitchell fought for the Southern Confederacy during the American Civil War. And I would say to them, well, so did at least 200,000 to at least 240,000 other Irish and Irish Americans. They all fought for the Southern states. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, and that has absolutely no bearing. I mean, there was Irish both sides of the American Civil War. The vast majority of them either fleeing the Holocaust or the children of, they're all, I suppose they were all Holocaust survivors, or the children of those who had died in the Holocaust. Do you know what I mean? And it's very, very, it just goes to show you, like, I mean, how far they'll go. They'll blacken one of the greatest Republicans there ever was, John Mitchell, who was born in County Derry. And his father had fought in.
And notice how they will try to bring that out about Mitchell, while at the same time they're praising the Irish soldiers who were fighting for England at the same time that the founding fathers were dying in Dublin.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
and they purely fixate on this whole thing that Mitchell fought for the South in the American Civil War. And I mean, as I've pointed out to them, I said, listen, there's actually several books written. I mean, I can tell you one now. The name of one now is called Irish Rebels, Confederate Tigers, by a fellow called, I think his second name was Gannon. Anyway, it's about the 6th Louisiana Regiment that in the southern state of Louisiana. I mean, they fought very, very hard. I mean, I think the vast majority of them, in fact, nearly them all, they were all Holocaust survivors or the children of Holocaust, those who died in the Holocaust. And, they fought with a particular ferocity. They were apparently General Lee's, one of General Lee's greatest units. Like, you could always rely on them. And, I mean, there's another book as well by a fellow called Kelly Grady. He's from Virginia. He writes about the Holocaust as well, and he's a great defender of John Mitchell's. It's a pity you can't buy his books in Ireland. We bought a copy a number of years ago up in an Irish bookshop in Halifax there, which is the capital of Nova Scotia. And it's a great book. He really promotes Mitchell, and he says it's a shame that academia in Ireland have totally sidelined and blackened this man. And even during the war for independence,
most of the Irish immigrants fought on the side of the Union. I would think it'd be on the order of 10 to 1, 10 Union soldiers for every 1 Confederate soldier.
Yeah, but I mean that they found out now that there was quite a lot of Irish, and even during the war for independence, a lot of coffin ships landed in Charleston, and even during the war for
most of the Irish immigrants fought on the side of the Union. I would think it'd be on the order of 10 to 1, 10 Union soldiers for every 1 Confederate soldier.
Actually, you had British gunships stopping them. Yeah, but I mean that they found out.
The ships landed in Charleston and Savannah.
And even during the war for independence, a lot of coffin ships landed in Charleston.
most of the Irish immigrants from Ireland fought on the side of the Union. I would think that it would be on the order of 10 to 1. 10 million soldiers for every one Confederate soldier. The ships landed in Charleston and Savannah.
Even during the war,
I must have almost all from most of the Irish immigrants from Ireland fought on the side of the Union. I would think that it would be on the order of 10 to 1. 10 million soldiers for every one Confederate soldier. The ships landed in Charleston and Savannah.
Even during the war,
I must have almost all from the Irish.
So listen, to get back on track, Chris. Chris, you're organising events for November the 3rd of this year to celebrate, to commemorate. Sorry, not to celebrate, to commemorate the victims of the genocide of 1845 to 1852, more or less, because it didn't stop until approximately then. Really, people were still dying and they weren't back on their feet. It took, I know you say 5.2 million, Chris, but there's other people over here that will tell you there was at least 4 to 6 million undocumented Irish here, so that figure could be much higher. And me, that's living here and trying to revive and get back into my culture and everything, it seems logical to me that the Holocaust genocide that took part in Ireland in 1845 to 1852 it not only did it kill the people, but it killed their language and it killed their culture as well.
Yes.
There's other people over here.
Oh no, definitely.
I agree. By the way, those November 3rd masses have been going on now for about 20 or 25 years, and obviously the point of November 3rd is that it was on that date, November 3rd, 1845, that a delegation of Irishmen went to visit Lord Hawkesbury in his viceregal lodge in Phoenix Park, Dublin. They went there to plead with him to stop the food removal, going on now for about 20 or 25. That delegation of 22 included the mayor of Dublin and Daniel O'Connell, the liberator. They did their best, but before he bowed them out, he read to them from a paper about potatoes and blight, minimizing the latter, and then sent them on their way. And so that has to be considered, that moment has to be considered the official cap of approval on the food removal. That is the beginning of the Holocaust. And it's also the beginning of the Big Lie campaign about potatoes. There was indeed a blight, but the people died from want of food, not from want of potatoes. So the people who are pushing Gorta Mór and who are pushing great hunger, they're part of a very, very long line of liars throughout Irish history who have kept the Irish people and the world disinformed. In fact, they give rise to the notion of Irish stupidity, because there's nothing as stupid as growing only one failure-prone crop from sea to sea, and then when the crop fails, you have fallen into a trap of your own making. That is a very effective lie, and I think it has affected a generation of Irish-American children in the States who, when they come up looking for a seat in third-level education, their last name is looked at and they are considered stupid, largely because of that single lie, the lie that the Irish people were so stupid as to depend entirely upon only one failure-prone crop. So that's why we must end that. We must win this battle. And anyone who knows a teacher anywhere, particularly in Ireland, get them to stop lying.
Well, it's not taught now, Chris, at the curriculum, because my daughter doesn't know. Like, she's through primary school now, and she wasn't taught.
I see.
Right,
history is useful.
Yeah. History is very useful. Now, in all fairness, when I was taught now, and I'm a bit on a bit, like you can add me on for a half a century or so. When I was taught it, we were taught that 1 million people, there was 3 million people in the country, 1 million people died, 1 million people had emigrated, and there was 1 million people left. So it was like a maths class, you know?
Yeah, that was the basic, that's the lie that goes along with potatoes and famine.
Now, and I'm a bit on it, like you can add me on. You've done extensive research. Now, reading your book, Chris, you opened my eyes. I read your book. I was in Spain 2 years ago. I must read it again, actually, because I forget a lot of it. And it's a very, very, very sad book. And Neil, it was what inspired you to get involved in this November.
It was, yeah. I mean, I didn't know that there was anything being organised for the 3rd of November. I thought that reading Chris's book over here in a many cold winter night when we were snowed in. I thought to myself, hey, there's no reason why. I mean, because I could see around me in the local area here that Scottish Gaelic activists were being active. Were organising things like, they have their Highland Holocaust that they would commemorate over here, but they don't commemorate it in Scotland, which is kind of tying in what Chris is saying about about the Irish government and state and institutions covering up the Irish Holocaust. You have it might turn around, but no, we were inspired. There's a group of us, Holocaust in the Nail. We figured we'd have to pick that name and make it deliberate. And catch people's attention. Eye-catching material, Holocaust in the Nail. Can you
tell us what that is in what that's translated as, please, Neil? I know you're a fluent Irish speaker.
So that means the Holocaust of the Gaels of the Irish, of the Irish population. You could say, the genocide or the mass extermination or the attempted, mass extermination of them, of us as a people. That's what that means.
Call it back, James.
And I'm just going to put a link into that page there on the chat box for the people on People's Internet Radio there who are listening. Those of you who's on stream and came there through my Facebook page, I'm going to give you a link as well to that page just underneath that post. So just sorry guys for interrupting, but that's basically just to keep people informed of what we're talking about, Paul, are you back with us yet?
Yeah, I'm here, right.
No,
I'm here. Just sitting back listening. All good.
Oh, good. I have you any questions for the guys?
No, I'm just listening back, doing a bit of learning and that. I was chatting to Neil earlier on, and I actually mentioned it to you today. Did you hear about in France in 1789 where it was a grain shortage over there?
I
didn't get a chance to read up on that, but that was in around the time of
the French Revolution. I know. I heard that. I heard about that. Yeah, that was. There was supposedly it was just another weapon of starving the population to either make them, to either kill them off or to. But in this case, was to basically force a revolt, which eventually became the French Revolution. But I mean, that was all part of it too. That was a tactic as well. Starve the population, make them do one thing or the other. And they knew these people, whoever this sinister secret group that starved the population in France, knew exactly what they were doing, and they ignited the revolution as a result.
Was it the Jacobins? The Jacobins they were called. They were behind it, so they were. It was actually during the time.
Yeah, the Jacobins. Yeah.
The time of King Louis XVI. And they actually called that a famine as well at the time. But there's a few things in here on Facebook, and there was something there about not all so-called Irish fairy forts are forts. They are mass hidden graves.
I wouldn't think. By the way, somebody asked about the Irish for these words. The Irish for genocide is Kinayehu, and the Irish for Holocaust is Ampar Mór. and we should use on par more.
On tar more.
Because I know that those who are trying to keep the famine lie alive have adopted Irish to gain a false credibility for themselves, got them more. And I think it would be helpful if we adopt the Irish for Holocaust on par more.
On Tarmor.
Oh, we will, but the plan was that we would use this name with Gaelicized the name Holocaust to catch people's attention. You know what I mean? And it has worked very well. I mean, it has really drawn people in and let them see for themselves on the Facebook page itself. Here this is what happened. It wasn't a famine. There was no potato plague.
Yes.
And we always provide things to mention
how. Yeah, this might be a good idea to mention how Holocaust came into being. It was used by Michael Davitt, who was born during those hungry years in Strade, County Mayo, and was taken into a workhouse by his mother. But to continue, he used it throughout his work. So did Fitzgerald, and so did many others. But in the 4th of May, 1846, under the headline Landlord and Tenant, the Cork Examiner newspaper referred to Holocaust. On the 7th of August, the same year, 1846, under the headline The Whigs, was written, Landlordism is this moment all rampant and all powerful for evil and sacrifices its victims in holocausts. Individual rights is omnipotent, social wrong universal in Galway. We are told that the celebrated Mr. Gerard is again exercising more. And on the 22nd of January, 1847, in an article entitled, headed The Speech, Holocausts laid at your doorstep. Shall men be dimmed to death for no crime and then receive posthumous immortality for their patience? ? On the same date, the 22nd of January, 1847, under the headline Deaths in Bantry, was the Holocaust of Humanity was written. On the 25th of January, 1847, at the headline The Close of the Workhouse, was written The Holocaust, as a writer powerfully exposed it, offered at the shrine of political economy. On the 17th of September, 1847, under the headline The Holy Cross Demonstration, is written, Sanctified in the world, and the world's laws went on as if there were no tenant martyrology written in red, as if no peasant holocaust had ever smoked upon Tipperary's altars. We have said this much because the Evening Mail and its correspondent are loudly so-and-so and so-and-so. On the 1st of October, 1847, in a headline, Banquet to John Reynolds, Esquire, MP, in the Rotunda, we behold 1 million of our people, yes, 1 million of them, have been offered up a holocaust to the accursed Union, bracket, here, close bracket, and possibly the lives of 2 million more may be offered in the present year. That, again, on the 3rd of January, 1848, under the headline Town Council, Saturday, yes, 1.5 million of Irish people perished, were smitten and offered up a holocaust, whose blood ascends to the throne of God for redress. And on the 19th of November, 1855, under the headline The Ministry, added to the Holocaust. So those sentences or parts of sentences, all using the phrase Holocaust, were written at the time, in 1845 to 1851. So there you have it, Holocaust throughout the literature, and in one of the major newspapers in the country. So the notion that somehow another group has a primary claim on it flies in the face of what is called historical precedence. The first user, as if there's a moral title to it, if there's a moral claim, a proprietary interest in it, it belongs to the first user of it. So that should settle that issue. Continue, please.
Sorry, yes. So it was language that was used at the time it was going on. Why now? Why now do they want to call it a famine and not a Holocaust or a genocide?
Clearly, famine. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, clearly famine and Garda Moore sounds an awful lot better than Holocaust. You know what I mean? Holocaust says what it means on the tin. And I believe too. I mean, it was. I mean, from my own research into it, I've discovered the first people to start calling it, to start using the word Garda Mór came around. I think I'm near sure 1911, 1912, and it was some Home Rulers in John Redmond's party. They seen that the Gaelic revival was really going full flow, and they said, listen, instead of just calling it a famine and all, and undermining ourselves, and angering people, because there's even a famous Father Maguire, who was in Gros Isle, which is in Quebec. He challenged them on it. You know what I mean? He did not accept that he would even call it anything but the Holocaust. And they seen it as a type of compromise. Garda actually means injury in Irish. That's its proper definition, is injury. So, what they're basically saying is it was a great injury, and it was never called after the Irish speakers at the time, because I've been speaking to you as my first interview time on here. I went and I read some Irish manuscripts that I have, and got friends of mine at home to look into it as well, and they were talking to Irish, they were interviewing Irish speakers, both during and kind of after the Holocaust. And not once is there mention of the word Garda or Garda Mór, or that another word that they've invented now that I don't know where it came out of, Drochil.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, it is important to get the label correct, and here is why.
Yeah.
A great crime was perpetrated. The label must be appropriate to a crime. Hunger, Garda Mór, famine do not indicate crime. In fact, they cover up crime.
Yeah, so and
what's absolutely vital in this is to use what's called inculpatory, not exculpatory labels, but inculpatory ones that assign guilt, blame, that is the cause of this. And so there are three labels we could use, equally good in English: Holocaust, genocide, or policy of extermination. And policy of extermination was used by one of the British bureaucrats in Ireland at the time. Policy of extermination. Extermination should not be used by itself, because extermination suggests no survivors, and that is not applicable. So we're really stuck with only two, Holocaust and genocide. I use the word genocide in its generic use, and I use Holocaust in its specific use regarding Ireland.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's another reason too why I want to go back to John Mitchell and how he's been largely written out or blackened from Irish history. Is during the War for Independence, a lot of the men, the most fearsome units in the country, the IRA units that were fighting in that war, they were all reading John Mitchell's book, do you know what I mean? And they were always all reading about the Holocaust and what really happened. And, and that's what apparently made them really motivated and drove those men to go out, and men and women to go out and do the damage to the British imperial forces that they did. I think the Holocaust was a big, the revenge was a big factor for an awful lot of them, especially up around Tyrconnell, and you could say Sligo and Leitrim anyway, but definitely Tyrconnell. It was a big motive for them because John Mitchell's book was widely read by. In fact, it was required reading. If you're going to join the volunteers of the IRA.
Anyway, he could get away with it. Any Irish Catholic writer at the time would have been put to death. It's instructive to know that the writer of the proposal. What is the word? A proposal about the killing of children by Dean Swift.
Yeah.
Nothing was done to him, but the printer of it was imprisoned.
Yeah.
That speaks for itself. In other words, the law in Ireland was not exercised, was not implemented against people with any status in the country, but it was exercised against the general population. So Dean Swift, the writer of a modest proposal.
A modest proposal.
That's it. A modest proposal. Thank you very much. Thank you. A modest proposal indeed. That's what he wrote. Well, nothing was done to Dean Swift, but the printer of his article was put in prison. There you go. And John, and if it were an Irish Catholic who wrote what John Mitchell wrote, he too would have been done away with. John Mitchell was almost done away with himself, though he was a Protestant.
Yeah.
And would it be true to say, like we talk about this genocide that happened from 1845, but that genocide continued right past 1850 through evictions, right up to 1881 when that Michael Davitt and the landlady stopped it.
I'm inclined to think it continued until the landlords were gone from Ireland.
Yeah, I agree with Chris on that there. It continued right up, like, do you know what I mean, till they were gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but, I mean, it was
in the next edition of my book, I have photographs taken in 1888 on Lord Vandeleur's estate outside Kilrush, County Clare. And again, that was on July 1st, 1888, and the genocide is ongoing there. The difference, however, is that all of the vulnerable people were long dead. The poorest of the people, the people with fewest resources, the Irish-speaking people, were almost all murdered by then.
Yeah, the wipeout was almost complete. Because I do have your book here, and I'm just flicking through it, and I came to a page there in it, Chris, and it was 1848, and it starts off, a diminishing though still massive death rate, largely due to evictions, continued from 1852 through to 1881. But 1848, while the people were dying en masse, there was an attempt at a rising by the Young Ireland Party. They were predominantly the party of religious tolerance. As a first principle, they established fraternity between Catholic and Protestant members. The personification of this was one of its leaders, the immortal Thomas Davis, dead at 31. It was he who wrote A Nation Once Again. He also wrote the following: "What matter that at different shrines we pray unto one God? What matter that at different times our fathers won this sod? In fortune and in name we're bound by stronger links than steel, and neither can be safe or sound but in the other's weal. And oh, how it were a gallant deed to show before mankind how every race and every creed might be love combined, yet not forget the fountains whence they rose, and filled by many a revolt, stately Shannon flows." Yeah, so there was a lot of stuff written around that time, but I suppose, like everything else, an awful lot of it disappeared. And
he was
a lot to the country.
There was much uprising in Ireland at that time, and that's something that's never referred to in history either, is the rising of 1848. But the Starvelings never really had much of a chance in 1848. But then again, isn't it better to die on your feet than die on your knees?
Oh, absolutely.
You're right about that. In fact, one of Michael Davitt's continuing themes throughout his very long book, The Fall of Feudalism in Ireland, is that had more Irish died from bullet fire and from bayonets in 1845 to 51, that more of them would have survived. It's a very intriguing concept that they were too meek in the face of people coming in and robbing them of their food production.
Yes, and that's it. And I was looking for a story there. Perhaps I don't know. You may know it off by heart about the man who the sheriff had come and taken his cow, and he and his brothers and sons marched up to the sheriff's house that night, and they surrounded the house, and they wanted the sheriff to come out, and he had his sons in the house, and they surrounded the house, and they set the thatched roof on fire, and they let the women and children go, and but the men wouldn't come out, and they died where they was, and that was all over. I think the man was later hung, but that was over the sheriff taking a cow, and he needed that cow for the milk for his children, and that was during the famine years.
the Holocaust years.
You'll find it in that book. That was reprinted in a Limerick newspaper in the 1950s. And some people in Australia found out about it, and they traveled up to where their great-great-grandfathers had left from. Their fathers had been sentenced to death, and they were shipped as prisoners, as slaves, actually, out to Australia. One of them died en route, but two of them survived to have children, and they came back to County Limerick, where all that happened.
Yeah, it's absolutely astounding. Yeah, that this has been covered up. It is astounding that this cover-up has taken place.
Yeah, and by the way, the person they killed was a tithe proctor. He was a contractor collecting tithes for the local Protestant minister. All Catholics were required by law to give 10% of whatever the landlord left them, were required to give 10% of it to the Protestant church. And the police came around to collect it. And this man was one of them. He was what they call a tithe proctor. And
you would have been a real hated figure in the country.
But imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. He would have been the tithe proctors were real hate figures in Irish society at the time, because they were more or less they were just extortionists. There's no other word for them.
Don't worry, Neil. We still have them today. They go by a different name.
Yeah. But getting back to 1848, nobody really mentions James Fenton Lawler as much anymore. He led a rising, I think two risings in 1849. There were, he openly said that they were to revive the Young Ireland rebellion and against food removal, which is probably why they've been written out. But they were very brutally crushed. I mean, there were small numbers involved in the two risings in 1849. But thankfully, I think in the Seership paper, which is Republican Sinn Féin's main thing, a couple of years back in 2010, 2009, they had commemorations. They marked the two risings in 1849, against the food removals. Do you know what I mean? But there was a fellow who wrote a book there as well about 1848, and he said that there was a lot of guerrilla activity, especially in County Limerick, Tipperary, and up along, basically across the country. But he said it's just resistance. Had it been resistance focused on at the food removal, because they didn't seem to be. They seemed to be targeting the big houses. Roads. A lot of the fighting took place along roads and not much along fields. Especially crossroads. Towns, the outskirts of towns, even in cities as well. So that particular war had to have been, it was. I'd say that the main motivation behind it would have been the food removals, but they would have been fighting for freedom as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
can we move back a little bit? Go on, go ahead. Yeah, finish that one out. Yeah, finish that one out.
James Fenton Lawler was born and raised in Tinnahinch, Mountgrass, County Laois. They were a very large family. James Fenton himself, they call him Fenton Lawler, who did that magnificent writing. He had a spina bifida, a twisted spine, and was sort of handicapped his whole life. Did magnificent writing, absolutely beautiful, seminal stuff. His brother, Peadar Lawler, gave up on politics in Ireland, thought nothing could be done, went out there, went working in the mines in the Eureka mines in Ballarat in Australia, and he was a leader of the miners' revolt against the police trying to impose major taxes upon each digger, and a bunch of them died out there. Peadar Lawler lost an arm, and he later became a governor of that province in Australia.
Yeah, that was the first. Yeah, they declared a republic and everything out there. That's what they say was the beginning. He was the father of Australia. Today they call him the father of Australian republicanism. A republic free from the British crown and the empire and stuff. So they say he was actually the father of Australian republicanism, and he came up with the idea of a Republic of Australia. And the real Southern Cross flag, not the one that the Brits have hijacked. Their version that's like a crooked small Southern Cross with the Union Jack prominent in the corner. His Southern Cross was, you could say 4 or 5 stars, and the white cross, and in the middle of the flag. It's a very, very nice looking flag of Australia, and the dark blue background. Then it's basically he was the father of the Australian republicanism. That's still going there, strong there today. Do you know what I mean?
Can I give you this another?
I want to vary a little bit away from the Holocaust, but to mention that Southern Cross is really a very strange astronomical fact. In the north, we have what's called Polaris, a part of Orion that points directly to Polaris, the North Star. And at any seaman, any time if you can see the stars, you'll always orient yourself by the North Star. In the southern hemisphere, of course, the North Star is not visible, but they have there the Southern Cross. And the Southern Cross waves across the sky, and if you draw a line straight down through the main shaft of that cross, it always points directly, when it hits the horizon, that's south. In Argentina, where I worked for a few years, it's way up high in the sky, but still points exactly wherever that line hits the ground. It hits the horizon. That is south. Up as far as Venezuela, where I also worked, it's down low in the sky. In fact, it's like a windshield wiper. And the bottom point of the cross is right on the horizon. So that shows clearly where south is. But it's one of those really odd astronomical facts. So anyway, back to the Holocaust again. Forgive me the little anecdote.
Fascinating.
Chris, talking about the Irish bike. Sorry.
Irish what?
So you talk about Argentina. Did you see when you were working in Argentina, Chris? Did you hear much about or did you come across much word about the coffin ships that went down to there? They were fleeing out of the Irish Holocaust. Is there much among the Irish community there, or even among the locals there? Was there any knowledge or records about the Irish coffin ships?
Yeah, the Irish in Australia comprise about 1% of the population. They have the oldest newspaper in the Southern Hemisphere, the Southern Cross. It was started in the 1860s. I have the centennial edition of it from the 1960s. They mostly went out. There were a few waves that went out there. Some of them were the wild geese who went to Argentina via Spain as wild geese. Others then went out before the Holocaust in Ireland, I think connected to Irishmen in the British Army. There's a large number from Ballynacarragee in County Westmeath, and another large group from the southern end of County Wexford around Rosslare. And otherwise they're scattered, but there's a very large number around Ballynacarragee, around the Westmeath-Longford border area. And I think it was a chain migration. But and then some went out there post-World War II, but relatively few. The very large number of them went out in the 1830s through 1850s, well, mostly 1830s.
Yeah, you'd be interested to know too. Yeah, you'd be.
There are two headstones facing each other in La Recoleta, in the main Catholic cemetery of Buenos Aires. One is of Father, what's his name again? Not Father Flynn, from Lahray, County Galway, who led hundreds of people
Father
from County Galway to
Father Fahy. Yeah, Father Fahy.
Exactly. And then facing him is another headstone. Who the hell? Another very famous man.
William Brown, Admiral William Brown.
We talk.
Admiral
Guillermo Brown. Yes.
Yeah, Admiral Brown. Yeah, from Foxford and County Mayo. Yeah.
So, guys,
can I bring you've been there if you know about Guillermo Brown.
Yeah.
can I bring us back to another guy that was highly influential, 1845 to 1850, Trevelyan?
Yeah, just.
Yes, well, he was he was a spokesperson. He was the intellectual leader of the Holocaust.
Yeah, because I'm just reading I'm reading something off your irishholocaust.org site, and it's the official British intent. And I'll read it now for the listeners, if you don't mind, guys. It's quite long, so it's going to take a few minutes. Yeah. Official British intent at the time is revealed by its actions and enactments. When the European potato crop failed in 1844 and food prices rose, Britain ordered regiments to Ireland. When the blight hit the 1845 English potato crop, its food removal regiments were already in Ireland, ready to start. The Times editor of September the 30th, 1845 warned, in England, the two main meals of the working man's day now consists of potatoes. England's potatoes dependence was excessive, reckless, grossly overpopulated relative to its food supply. England faced famine unless it could import enough Irish food to save England. It took more for profit and to exterminate the people of Ireland. Queen Victoria's economist Nassau Sr. expressed his fear that existing policies will not kill more than 1 million Irish in 1845, and that will scarcely be enough to do much good. When an eyewitness urged a stop to the genocide in progress, Trevelyan replied, "We must not complain of what we really want to obtain." Trevelyan insisted that all reports of starvation were exaggerated until 1847. He then declared it ended and refused entry to the American food relief ship Sorcerer. Thomas Carlyle, influential British essayist, wrote, "Ireland is like a half-starved rat that crosses the path of an elephant. What must the elephant do? Squelch it, by heavens, squelch it." Total annihilation, suggested the Times leader of September the 2nd, 1846. And in 1848, its editorialist crowd, "A Celt will soon be as rare on the banks of the Shannon as a red man on the banks of Manhattan. The immoral society of friends, the Quakers, did all in our power to save lives, but in 1847 they despaired and quit upon learning that the Crown planned to perpetuate the genocide's pretext, the British claim of ownership of Irish land. Quakers refused to facilitate pretext the British claim of ownership of Irish land." Sorry, I read that line twice. Quakers refused to facilitate the genocide by pretending, as concerned does re-African genocides, it was an act of nature. In the 1870s, too late, British laws were enacted allowing the Irish to buy back the land of which Britain had robbed them. Twice yearly payments were extracted from Ireland's farmers until that debt was paid off, and in the 1970s. Ireland's diet since prehistory has been meat, dairy products, grain, fruit and vegetables, latterly supplemented by potatoes. Central to its ancient legends are its livestock reaping hooks, flails, querns and grain killings and mills. The main Connacht grain killings and mills shown on the Irish Ordnance Survey map of 1837 to 1841 operated constantly prior to, during the starvation and subsequently to it until the 1940s, when I observed them still working. Local farmers dried and milled their grain, not potatoes. In them, this oatmeal and flour were seized and exported by British forces. The potato famine, big lie, was underway and already denounced by John Mitchell in his United Irishman in 1847. He was soon sent in chains to a Tasmanian death camp, but escaped. 50 years later, G.B. Shaw wrote in Man and Superman, Malone, "My father died of starvation in Ireland in the Black 47. Maybe you've heard of it, Violet. The famine, Malone, with a smouldering passion. No, starvation. When the country is full of food and exporting it, there can be no famine, but kept mum on the British Army's roll. Ireland's whole truth tellers don't deceive nobles. To date, the big lie prevails. It started in 1846 while the British government genocidally stripped Ireland of its abundant foodstuffs. Internationally, it was begging for help for the starving Irish. John Mitchell remonstrated. Many will perhaps be surprised to learn neither Ireland nor anybody in Ireland ever asked alms or favours of any kind, either from England or from any other nation of people. On the contrary, it was England herself that begged for us, asking a penny for the love of God to relieve the poor Irish, and further constituting herself the almonger and agent of the charity. She, England, took all the profit of it. Mitchell again. Thus, any man who had a house, no matter how wretched, was to pay the new tax, and every man was bound to have a house. For if found outdoors after sunset and convicted of that offence, he was to be transported for 15 years or imprisoned for 3. The court to have the discretion of adding hard labour or solitary confinement. This law would drive the survivors of ejected people, those who did not die of hunger, into the poorhouses or to America, because being bound to be at home after sunset and having neither house nor home, they would be in the absolute power of the police and in continual peril of transportation to the colonies, Australian poor labour camps. By another act of Parliament, the police force was increased and taken more immediately into the service of the Crown. The Irish counties were in part relieved from their pay, and they became, in all senses, a portion of the regular army. They amounted to 12,000 chosen men, well armed and drilled. The police were always at the command of the sheriffs for executing ejectments, and if they were not in sufficient force, troops on the line could be had from the nearest garrison. No wonder that the London Times, within less than 3 years, was enabled to say, "Law has ridden roughshod through Ireland. It has been taught with bayonet and interpreted with ruin. Townships levelled with the ground, struggling columns of exiles, workhouses multiplied and still crowded, expressed the determination of the legislature to remove Ireland from its slovenly old barbarism and to plant the institutions of this more civilized land, meaning England." Mitchell also wrote, "Steady but surely the government was working out its calculation, and the produce anticipated by political circles was likely to come about September of 1847 in round numbers, 2 million Irish corpses." So that's a piece off your irishholocaust.org site, Chris, of the British intent in Ireland leading up to 1845.
Yes, that's the way that's all from the record, yes. So there were plenty of writers at the time, but there's something wrong with the government of Ireland, and it's not starting today. I was going to school there in the late 40s, and we were lied to then. The word, even now, you can hardly blame perhaps Jane Wilde of L'Esperanza for using the word famine, because that is the word that was used by the cover-up artists. At the time, between 1845 and 1850, there were 100 newspapers in Ireland. All were Protestant-owned, except the Cork Examiner, and that's where you see Holocaust, you see. Even the Republican ones were not owned by Catholics. They tend to be owned by Protestants, though Catholics wrote in them. The Nation and the various journals. But 100 newspapers were written by, for, and about the ascendancy of Ireland. It's absolutely astonishing. Though they were only about 5% of the population, they had 99 papers writing about their events. It stuns. And so, for some reason, when Ireland became nominally free, somebody continued to poison the well of history. And why did the Irish people permit it?
Well, things haven't changed now, Chris. Like you have the one newspaper group who owns just about every newspaper in the country, independent newspapers. One media group, Dennis O'Brien is one guy who owns nearly all the media here. And then you have Radio Television England, which is obviously run by, people say the government here, but it is a provisional government and it is an imposed government of the 6th of December 1921. But even before that, like when that government came into being in 1922, I think it was June 1922, like they were still under the king and they still are under the king. So like nothing has changed here in Ireland apart from we might think we have a few bob more in our pocket, or they've just found different ways to dispossess us. Currently, today in Ireland, there's 140,000 people facing the road of eviction over the next 2 to 3 years, and there is another 300,000 or 400,000 mortgages in this country that are on interest only, and basically when they're finished dealing with the other guys, the 140,000, they're going to be coming for them. There is an epidemic of eviction coming down the road in Ireland today, and this is all supported by in actual fact, the laws that enable them to evict by the provisional. Things still very, very difficult to get anything to break through. A few years ago, I started a website called Fair Society, and for a while it done really well. Okay, and when some of the information was being published on it, all of a sudden it used to get hacked. It could get hacked maybe 4, 5, 6 times a day, the blog could. And you spent your whole time, so instead of writing about what was going on, you spent your time fixing the website to try and get it back up so people could read to see what you were writing. You know, it became, and that's still going on here in Ireland today. You know, if I put something controversial up there, on 2 occasions I've had the Gardaí Síochána at the door. You know, so just because everything has a different name doesn't mean that what happened in 1845, well, it's different now. It hasn't gone away, and there's a massive push coming now to dispossess the Irish people again, because they must feel we've gathered up something worth taking again, you know? And that's modern Ireland, guys.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of people, and I'm going to tell you, suicides, we have 10, 12 suicides here a week, and it's all related to what is going on in courts. And again, we have the judicial system in this country is established in 1541 by King Henry VIII, when he gave the Law Society and the King's Inn there in Constitution Hill license to practice law here and to be the law in Ireland. And he took the Franciscan monks monastery and he gave it to the King's Inn there in Constitution Hill, as I said, the Law Society. So it's even before sorry, did I lose this here?
No, I can still hear you.
No, I've lost somebody.
Yeah,
is Chris, are you still here?
Yes, you've got back on.
Oh yeah, I've got you back on. Okay, Chris. Yeah, I thought we lost you there for a second. I seen somebody ringing in.
We did. And the break was on my end, not yours.
Oh, okay. Well, look, it wouldn't. We're talking about the Holocaust. They don't want this discussed. Here, they don't want it discussed openly on the airwaves, and I suppose it's only radio stations like People Internet Radio that will talk about these sort of subjects. You'd never hear it on Main Street Radio, on local radio, or on community radio for that matter either. Nobody will talk about this. They might talk about a book about the Great Famine or the Great Hunger or on Uchras Mór or whatever you want to call it, but they will never talk about the genocide
that
actually happened.
Right.
Is
there some interference with today or no?
I don't think so. I think it could be the bad weather. We have Storm Brian hitting us now at the moment, Chris. I doubt that there's any interference. But while we talk about that, very recently there, you actually got onto Irish mainstream media over a monument that's up in RD in County Louth, commemorating the genocide and Holocaust and the British regiments in that area. Was it Joe?
I was flabbergasted. Joe Duffy, it was an ambush and very carefully done. I was really surprised at how cunningly it was operating. He had one young man on who I had been in email correspondence with, who told me that he would be able to make a monument that would induce a greater reverence for those who were buried in the mass grave near him. And so I agreed to pay €1,000 more than what I'm paying for the ones that I'm now installing. My wife and I are installing. And so he said he would go ahead and send me a sketch of what he intended. I was waiting for that sketch when it turns out he was on the radio with Joe Duffy, and he called me a con man. And then Joe Duffy called me Trump.
Donald Trump?
and some other woman... Yeah, exactly. And then some other woman blamed the trouble in the North of the 1970s on my headstone that was put up in 2016 in County Louth.
Yeah, I did listen to the interview, and he was out to get you from the start, wasn't he?
I'm stunned that you have people that cunning willing to conceal a genocide. And of course, it takes a special talent of liar. The reptilian portion of the brain has got to be very well developed in order to do that kind of thing. You wonder what kind of monster he must be in other ways.
Yeah, but the way they look
I can tell you now, that particular individual as well, he's well known at home for what he does. Like, you know what I mean? There was an Irish film that was made. I think it was called Shrooms, that it was Irish made and produced and everything, and it got into some British Academy Awards or something like that, and was nominated. And there was people, he was the one going on there saying, "Oh, sure, it's great that they're on there. It's just great that an Irish film is in the British, list and all. It's been listed as being British and all." And of course, there's people who are ringing into his radio show and openly telling him, "Listen, we're Irish people, this is Ireland, you know what I mean? This is why, and they listed off a whole range of reasons why an Irish film shouldn't be listed as British no matter where it is. And Joe Duffy was defending, being a real strong defender. Oh, sure, what does it matter? Sure, the film's getting publicity.
I wish the crime would stay with the Crown where it seems to have originated, but the lie is also spreading. Christine Keneally is no longer in Belfast or in Liverpool. She's now in the state of Connecticut in the States, still spreading her falsehoods. And the University of Illinois were in outside Strokestown, County Roscommon, some years ago. They spent a couple of summers there with their students during their vacation time doing a dig, the dig of the old townland of Ballykilcline. And after a few years of digging there, they called an end to it, and they exhibited all of their exhumed artifacts at the Percy French Hotel in Strokestown. I just happened to be out at the site that day, and I stopped in. And they had nice, neat little 3x5 cards with the name of every little thing they found. Whether it would be a piece of beltware or an old spoon or something. But there was only maybe 50 or 60, or 50 or 60 artifacts which they had unearthed from that time, the 1840s. But one of the items was there behind a case, but it was not marked. There was no name to it. I immediately recognized it because there used to be one on every farm in Ireland, a reaping hook. They call them sickle, like hammer and sickle. And they didn't put a name on it. And I asked them, why doesn't everyone recognize what this is? The wooden handle part of it was missing, but the shank that goes into the handle was there, so it was clearly what it was. I said, why is this not named? And they did, and the professor did not want to acknowledge that. They just wanted me to go away. Well, they did a film eventually about that day, and it's called Famine to Freedom. And in it, the entire film is all about their scientific work, which proves that the people there fell into a lethal trap of their own making by growing only one failure-prone crop, potatoes. Now, they deliberately concealed what they found underground there, an old reaping hook. And you don't use a reaping hook for potatoes. That's used for grain crops, and until it was superseded by the scythe, and then later by the mowing machine and reaper and binder. But it's shocking that professors from the University of Southern Illinois, here in the middle of the United States, will go over there and participate with fraudulent Irish professors in order to drive home a cover-up of an old genocide. And that's what was done. And the name of the movie that they put out is Famine to Freedom. It's really stunningly evil in what it tries to do.
The sickle, like, actually, that's something that myself and Paul had talked better about this. You're still there, I take it, Paul, and not asleep. Yes. But the mills and kilns around Ireland, you've done quite a bit of looking into that.
Yes, in fact, there are thousands of them. On page, I'll just take a second to find it. We list actually everyone in the whole country, and there are a total of, I'll tell you now, there are, I didn't do a total of them, but there were, in Antrim there were 56 corn mills, and 61 in Armagh. Do you have that map? That there were 139 corn mills in County Mayo. For Cecil Wood and Smith said that no corn grew. She said no corn grew in I know she said Sligo and Donegal. The fact of the matter is that in Donegal there were 135 corn mills and 463 corn hills.
Well, were they not for making mashed potato?
Pardon me?
Were they not for making mashed potatoes? That's a joke, Chris.
Yeah, of course it is. It's not a bad one. Yes, but they had, and it shows there were literally a few thousand corn mills in the country, many hundreds of corn kilns, a few hundred flour mills, probably 50 or 60 breweries, about 40 or 50 distilleries. There were threshing, and there were many hundreds of cattle pounds. So there were cattle there also. And so they're all listed there. And my wife and I found them by going on to the Irish Ordnance survey maps that were surveyed between 1837 and 1843, and then I think a little bit earlier. And then they were all completely engraved by 1845, and they list every single one of those. In fact, they list every house in the country for that matter. It's a splendid piece of work. The whole point of the work was to prepare for the upcoming genocide. They wanted to find out where is the wealth, where is everything grown, where are the grain mills and the grain fields, and they went there and they took it away at gunpoint.
Yeah.
The same thing was done 1,000 years earlier.
Yeah.
The same thing was done earlier by.
Yeah, I can tell you that there was grain kilns destroyed in a place of, in fact, where Glenveigh National Park is now, and Tyrconnell or Donegal, the other name for it. I remember years ago being a child, we came across two grain kilns that were they had to have been deliberately pulled down, and they weren't pulled down by the people, local people, because they relied on them. But they were deliberately destroyed by British troops. And that's what the local stories say about it. Like, we came across it because my uncle was working with a fire machine, and these were destroyed because the people were still able to keep hoarding food and keep them in operation during the Holocaust. So they came back with I think 2 regiments, and they just destroyed them. You know what I mean? I don't know how they did it, but they pulled them down and scattered them.
Yeah. Well, I would think that in most cases, they didn't want to take the raw grain. They preferred to get the processed grain. So I would think that they would let the people perform the next work on the crop and then take it when it was ready to be eaten. They would prefer to take flour than to take wheat. They would prefer to take wheat that had been thrashed rather than take wheat that's grown in the field. In other words, wait until all the work is done. And that includes drying it in the kiln and milling it. So there was not much destruction of mills going on because they needed the work to go on in the mills in order to be able to get the grain that the mill produced.
Yeah, I believe in around 1840 here. Now, like myself and Paul live on the east coast of Ireland here, and in County Louth, which is the smallest county in Ireland, there was 42 mills and kilns operating in that area. Now, that's only a small county in Ireland. It's still a small county. So, like, the vastness, why were all these here? Like, there was the most beautiful pasture land here, and the finest and fattest cattle were grown at that time, and obviously the mountains were full of sheep. So, you know, one wonders, like, why would you be relying on one crop of food? Like, there was 18 crops grown in the country at the time. I believe pigs was something that every family would have kept a pig, and basically, one wonders, how did they starve when one crop doesn't grow? And funny enough, while we're on that subject, if you were to come around Ireland today, it's the most fertile land on the planet is in Ireland, and there is absolutely no food growing in our fields, none. 70% of the cattle who graze the pastures is exported. Any of the grain that is grown, 70% of that goes back in to feed the same cattle, and 70% is exported. But this is an island nation. Let's just say, for argument's sake, war broke out tomorrow. Yeah, there is no food in this country to feed people.
That's a serious mistake, and it's the same thing that's happening here in the U.S. to a certain extent. There was a time for maybe 30 years after the Second World War when the Irish government subsidized farmers to stay in place and even subsidize their crops to keep them in place in case there would be any kind of an international breakdown. They have ceased doing that, and the island has ceased doing it also. It is a very serious mistake to put your entire population in danger like that. The entire infrastructure of food, enough food for the country, should have been kept in place, should have been kept going. And there should be, tillage should have been kept going. And it's a very serious mistake to not keep it going.
There's little or none in this country. Little, and I mean little to none, right? Spuds are grown. Yeah, sorry, spuds are grown, and they go to Curraha to Tato. Yeah, Tato factory. And they become crisps. So that's where the majority of the potatoes that's grown here goes to. Tato buys them up. And because they make all the walkers, and it's one factory, and it makes all the crisps that you get in any store in Ireland will be made there, right? So the majority of the potato crops go to the Tato factory, yeah? So that's what we have here. There is very little in the way of market gardening done in this country, and farmers are actually paid not to till their land.
Well, Ray, look at it this way.
Let's make it up.
Look at it this way, Ray. If Tesco's runs out of food tomorrow, and Lidl and Aldi and them supermarkets, then there's no food in the country.
No. There's no food in this country at the moment. Well, there's enough food maybe to last us a week.
And nobody knows how to even make a loaf of bread.
Ooh.
No, they don't know how to cook. The people in this country don't know how to. They wouldn't know how to make bread. If I gave them a handful of wheat, they wouldn't know how to turn it into flour.
They wouldn't even know how to plant any vegetables. They've taken all them skills away, all the life-saving skills away. What life should be about, they've taken them skills away.
Something that I will talk again. An experiment is needed here to see if people could move back on the land, and it is needed. But obviously to try that experiment, land would be needed, you know. So I think we should be moving back to an area where a family lives on an acre of land or acre and a half of land, and they grow their own food in the garden. They keep their own chickens. They organic. Obviously, everything should be organic. It is sufficient enough. There was 9 of us, 9 children when we grew up, when I was growing up, and we lived from our half-acre garden. That's what we lived on. The potatoes were planted, the turnips were planted, the onions were planted, the cabbage, the cauliflower, the sprouts. They were all planted in our garden. But that's also gone from Ireland. They grow grass now, you know. But I don't have fur on my back. Can't eat grass in the case of an emergency. So what people would eat in this country if war broke out in the morning. And most people don't even think of that, but like Europe is on the verge of war.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can see that in Russia, for example, your man Putin now, he's funding, he's actually given land away in Siberia free for Russian farmers to take it up. Like, it's quite a lot of farms. Like, I know I was watching a show here a show on the internet, Ear to the Ground, the RTE player, and apparently there's Irish farmers heading out to Russia. I'm getting 18,000 acres and only allowed to employ Russians and having to learn Russian. And, you know, because since the Americans and the Europeans brought in these, what do you call them? Brought in these, these things against Russia, the economic sanctions against Russia. I mean, that's what the Russians are going back to. They're going back to the land, and they're giving land away free, especially in the eastern part of Russia, Siberia, for any Russian who wants to start farming, and they're helping them out and they're subsidizing them.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean?
You might know that upon the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989-1991. A few million people died of starvation in Russia and Soviet Union at that time in the switchover, the abandonment of communism. And I have a friend who's a mathematics professor in Ireland. He recently retired. I won't name him. But he has come here to Chicago to seminars, and he used to go to mathematics seminars in Russia. And I asked him to find out from his Russian friends how they survived the hunger in Russia at the switchover when the communism collapsed. And he said, they all told me the same thing. Either have a farm or have family who has a farm. I have a friend who's a mathematics professor and poetry in Ireland. That's what he said he learned from his Russia. He used to go to Russia.
Yeah. Well, basically, look, I put this out here tonight. If anything, God forbid, untoward happens in the next 6 months in this country, we'll starve again. The people will starve. Wow. Like, they will starve. There is no food in this country. There is no food being grown in this country, and any food that is being grown is being poisoned with chemicals. So there you have it.
You're probably not old enough to remember, but there was a compulsory tillage in Ireland. It started about 1946, I think it was, and you had to till 1/3 of your arable land. And most people did that anyways, so it wasn't a major distortion for most people on small farms in Connacht. But for large farmers, it must have been quite an inconvenience to have to till 1/3 of your plow, 1/3 of your land. But that's how that worked. And so therefore, in all those years, there was an awful lot of grain grown in Ireland, and was shipped, of course, mostly over to England. My father bought a threshing machine, and we used to start threshing back around Knock in County Mayo and work our way along the country areas into Ballyhonnet and Ballinlough in County Roscommon, and then throughout town, Castlereagh, out the far side, Ballintubber, up into County Galway, Ballymoe, Williamstown, Ballinbally, and Kilkerran. And we'd end the season in Kilkerran with our threshing machine. So I got to know a lot of the farmhouses and how they lived there. Of course, we were farmers ourselves. But let's go back for a moment, if you don't mind, to this November 3rd, this requirement that we remember the 5.2 million or 6 million people murdered by a mass said on November the 3rd, the anniversary of the official beginning of the Holocaust on November 3rd, 1845, and also the beginning of the big lie of famine, Gothamore, and great hunger. All of those are there. People were hungry, surely, but to say merely hungry is, if a bank is robbed, you don't talk about the bank's need for money, you talk about the robbery. And so what happened in Ireland was a robbery, an organized, massive robbery of the people of their own production. And that's what we must focus on. There's no mystery here. And let's not encourage people. Let's not ask people, why would people get hungry if only one crop failed? That asks them a question. Tell them the truth. The people were murdered. They were genocided when 67 British regiments came into the country and removed the food at gunpoint. So let us have these masses fed, and we're having them fed at, let me just see for a second, at in New Jersey, in Venice, Florida, in Morrow County, Limerick, at Holy Name Cathedral here beside us in Chicago, in All Saints Church in Kentucky, in St. Maria Valley Church in Chilla Park, Illinois, in Madre de Adoro Cristo y Sagrado Sacramento in Cordova, Veracruz, Mexico, and at St. Joseph Church, Oxley Drive in Watford, Britain. By any chance, Neil, do you have any other churches?
November
3rd Mass will be fed?
Yeah, I'd be crucified if I wasn't to mention that. Of course, we're organising things across Canada, especially in Halifax. They're not masses now, but they're vigils and they're commemorations. And we have Halifax. We're expecting a big crowd at that. As it stands, we're organising things for Gross Eel. But in Ireland, Gross Eel and on the Irish Holocaust Park, at the Irish Park in Toronto as well, there's going to be a big commemoration and vigil, for the Holocaust, to remember the victims and martyrs of the Holocaust. But back home in Ireland, then there's a special mass being set up in Carrs Hill outside Cork City on the 3rd of November, noon at 12 noon, 3rd of November. It's been organised by Holocaust Not. We're hoping for a big crowd at that. It's a very special mass. We have other commemorations then planned for across the country, and the Holocaust plot in Armagh City. We have hopefully the Holocaust plot in Letterkenny and maybe even Dunfanaghy as well, in County Donegal or Tyrconnell. We have one organised in South Kilkenny. We have down in the Dublin Quay, which is going to take the Holocaust vigil and commemoration is going to taking place in Dublin Quay on the 3rd of November at 7 p.m. down at the Holocaust Memorial, where you have the statues of the Holocaust victims and stuff down at Dublin Quay. We have we have quite a few things. We have a list on our page anyway of places and locations organised so far. We have a wee girl from County Tyrone who's doing a gig in Sydney, Australia. And she's doing it especially for the Holocaust. In Sydney, Australia, she's doing it especially for and in remembrance of the murdered millions that she's going to be saying of the Irish Holocaust. We have Canada, we have Ireland. We're organising. We have things organised in England as well. There's a good fella who's organising something in Derby in England. We have one organised in Liverpool. We have Glasgow as well. We have organised vigils as well and commemorations. Where else? We have a whole list up there anyway, and we have a list up anyway. But our main event in Ireland now, and the main event around, they're all important. I want to make that clear. All the events are important and they're all appreciated. But the special mass in Carrs Hill at noon, for noon Friday 3rd of November, if people can make it, we'd really appreciate that. And if people too could make it to even the one at 7 p.m. down at the Dublin Quay at the Holocaust Memorial in Dublin, also on this Friday evening, 7 p.m. 3rd of November. we'd appreciate that as well. And we'd appreciate people too to come to any of the locations. We've any of the locations wherever they are in the world. We'd be Ireland, England, Scotland, Australia, America, especially and Canada too. Chris, you've done great work organising masses, special masses all over the place. Like you've even organised 2 masses in Mexico that I've seen from the list. And I think it's after this is all inspired by your book, by the way. And reading your book, I decided, we need to do something about this here, because this is a joke that this should be a national day of remembrance for the murdered millions. I mean, the country lost possibly over half the population. We've never recovered from that.
Exactly.
Our culture, our language. Our language, or the Irish language has been dying. But don't get me wrong, the language is coming back again slowly. But we lost an awful lot because of that. I mean, we can't. It's probably the most traumatic event to ever hit our country. And we suffered 3 genocides within 300 years, and the shortest genocide, which was the Holocaust, which is you could say was 5 or 6 years, or but stretched on further. I mean, that done the most damage, and it's done an awful lot of psychological damage, to Irish people as well. When they're
indeed.
I must say, you've completely re-energized this November 3rd mass date. You inspiring me, and Neil, and I'm very proud of you, and thank you so much. We're indebted to you.
Well, I really appreciate that, Chris, but to be honest with you, I'm indebted to you for opening my eyes. I had no problem in my ignorance, had no problem using the word famine and Gartha or Gartha Moor before I read your book. And your book really, I remember when your book was read around here in this area of Nova Scotia, and we've got 2 copies of it, and there were 2 copies got at home and in a few other places at home, and they're the most read books and most widely reread books. It's a shame that it's only 1,000 copies that you got done up. But I don't know if you know, Chris. I was doing a bit more research there. I'm reading a book at the minute. It comes from Tyrconnell. It's about a place very dear to my heart, the Famine Peninsula. It's written by a fellow called Hugh Dorian. It's called The Outer Edge of Ulster, a memorial of social life in 19th century Donegal. He mentions the food removals and things like that there. His book was published once. It covers the whole area of this particular area of Tyrconnell from 1830 to 1890. And these people, even though the food was removed, right? What these people done in that particular area was there was a lot of shipwrecks around Famine. Famine is the Gaelic-speaking area today, but there was a lot of shipwrecks. And what the people would do there is they would either light fires on the coast, giving the impression that to draw ships in to make them feel safe, so they run around or they get shipwrecked. And they also developed a method that nobody to this day knows how they did it. They were able to disable the main mast in a ship, draw it close enough to the. I think personally it would have taken cannon fire and chain shot to do that, but however they done it, they were able to disable the mast of a ship, basically allow the ship to run aground, and they would just attack it then straight out. They would basically seize the ship and seize the food, and they'd strip the wood as well, so there'd be no evidence of a ship there at all. But there was the 38th Regiment of the British Army eventually was sent up to Famine in 1846, just to deal with these people. They were based on Letterkenny, and they were sent up to more or less deal. To reinforce the food removal around Letterkenny, and to put an end to what was happening in Famine, because they were obviously in great fear that this would spread. People luring ships in and to run aground and stuff and all. And that's what saved the population of Famine during the Holocaust was shipwrecks. And all of those ships, has to be made clear, contained food that was removed from other parts of the country. You know what I mean? Famine people were having the food removed from themselves, and they were able to, use just native guile, I suppose. And but that's the 38th Regiment anyway. We don't know how many people they killed, but they were very, very brutal, and it ended up in a local land war that was particularly it started off slowly. I mean, the Irish, the locals had the upper hand from 1846 to 47, but then it got really, really nasty and bloody from 1847 to 48, and I think they were violently put down, but they survived. You know what I mean? They took an awful lot of bloodshed to put them down. I know at least 7,000 people were killed in that area. You know, resisting food removals or resisting them seizing the food. But it'll be great. But I noticed too. Now I just thought that that it'll be of interest to you, Chris. And what I'll do is I'll photocopy it out of the book here, and I'll post it on to you down in Chicago.
I appreciate that. The only garrison town, British Army garrison town in Donegal was Ballyshannon. But you see, that would be a base from which they would travel all around. There was no field in Ireland that was not accessible to the British Army. They were everywhere. And by the way, they only went in after the constabulary and the landlord's militia were running into trouble. British Army acted only when the others were meeting resistance. But while the constabulary often failed to rob the people,